So, neuroplasticity,
It's my favorite word.
happiness, living a long, meaningful, happy life. It occurs to me that there's a tremendous amount when it comes to talking about the brain that has relevance not only in terms of what we already know and understand, but how it is that you can massage aspects of how you live, what it is that you practice on a day-to-day basis, so that you can achieve contentment. You can have a brain that actually works for you, runs your life, rather than it running yours. And that's going to be central to our discussion today. All about neuroplasticity, how the brain keeps generating itself and reinventing itself and remaking itself. Up to about 10, 15 years ago, science still believed that the brain kind of petered off as the years went on, as it got older, and it just kept losing brain matter. And what we now know is that the brain keeps regenerating itself as you get older. And there's a word that explains that, which is, I'm going to repeat it again, neuroplasticity. And I want to hear more about it.
Well, I assume none of you came here to get less optimized. Is that correct? Okay. I think we're always looking to optimize, to grow, to get better, at least the people in this room. And that requires the same common state in all beings. That requires a state of neuroplasticity, meaning your brain and nervous system's capacity to learn, adapt, change, and then own those changes in your personal body so that you can go forward in your life with a greater sense of resilience and a greater sense of having digested what it is you experienced. This way you don't have to make the same mistakes 5,000 times. And that is the same capacity in every single one of our brains. Our brains change their structure and function based on use. That has been shown by science, that is measurable, and there's a lot of inputs to make that happen. And we'll talk about those inputs, but there's everything from your mental practices that affect structure and function of the brain, to what you eat, to how you sleep, to when you sleep, to the relationships you keep, to the goals you pursue. It's the base operating system secret weapon to be able to self-direct the way your brain can focus, learn, change, and make you resilient and adaptable. So that's kind of my long-winded answer for what is neuroplasticity.
And also, I would say the rise within the brain, within the body itself, of all the elements, the different kinds of chemicals, different kinds of neurotransmitters that are produced within the brain that actually generate happiness. And happiness can be defined in any number of ways. And actually, there's a broad spectrum of what happiness may mean for any one of us. So there's everything from contentment to joy to epiphany, and we could go on from there, right? Ecstatic moments. So I'm interested in how it is that you can achieve contentment. Can you be content on a day-to-day basis with your life, right? Even through the rough moments, through the tough moments. What are the practices? What are the protocols? What are the things that you can generate in your day, right? How it is that you start your day, how it is that you get through your day. So in large measure, it appears to be almost like a contemplation, that life becomes a contemplation in large measure, and out of that comes a sense of contentment. How it is that you reduce the elements in your life that will kill off brain cells, that will stymie and thwart your ability to be a happy human being. Right, so I'm interested in both things, the things that amplify states of mind that are actually pro-you, and how it is that you reduce the practices and the ways of being that actually damage you. How do we reduce needless suffering? We're going to suffer anyway, right? But how do you reduce the needless suffering aspect of it all? And that's something that I think Lisa has a great deal to say about. I think her Janice's story is really quite remarkable. And would you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so some of you might have heard this story before, but I grew up meditating. Don't know why. Wasn't part of my culture, but I learned at 12. And I was fanatical and thought I had a handle on my nervous system. And at 15, I suffered traumatic incident. I was hit by lightning on my birthday in the base of the spine and developed a life-threatening seizure disorder that was the result of my nervous system being now hypervigilant, supercharged, unregulated. And then anytime my body experienced stress that was outside of the not even outside of the normal amount of stress, my nervous system didn't know what to do with it. So I would go into a profound freeze response. I would have tonic-clonic seizures, which are rigid. My heart would stop, which is called bradycardia, and I would go blue, and I wouldn't be breathing. And as I did this more and more as my response to the world, my nervous system through neuroplasticity got better and better at doing this more and more. That's what it does. And so that's an example of non-self-directed negative neuroplasticity. I'm relearning a negative pattern. So by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was flatlining and needing resuscitation on multiple occasions. One occasion, I woke up to the needle of atropine right here, just before it was the Pulp Fiction moment. And those seizures were profound invitations to understanding my felt sense, which I refused to listen to until they got so bad I was literally dead and not really wanting to come back. So what I will say is, to your point about contentment, I don't know what you're looking for in terms of how you define content, but I will tell you for sure, I know it requires that your mind understands how to feel your body and that your body is safe enough to have a felt sense for your mind to ponder, consider, and make part of your world. And if you've separated mind and body, which our culture does, we've got science versus, we've got religion versus, we've got data versus, anecdotal versus, right? We separate all the time. And I will tell you that that is the biggest disservice to your experience on this planet. And I was a living example of neuroplasticity gone in a negative direction. I got so good at dissociative living that I was seizuring all the time. And Western medicine told me there was nothing to do about it. I couldn't be medicated because I wasn't epileptic. It was brainstem. It was involving my vagus nerve. It was a profound dorsal vagal life that I was living. And I was just gonna probably just have one seizure where no one was around at some point and not ever wake up from it. But I had a daughter, and I was a single mother at the time. And this was non-negotiable. She witnessed me flatline in Whole Foods at 3, and she watched paramedics try to resuscitate me. And the first thing she asked me when I opened my eyes, I didn't even know where I was or where she was. The first thing she asked me was, "Mommy, did you die?" Like, what do you say to that? So we got home from the hospital that day, and I had to start teaching her how to dial 911. Those are the first number sequence she ever learned, was 911. And that's when I was like, I'm learning neuroscience. I'm learning how to understand my nervous system. There has to be a solution. Neuroplasticity got me into this extreme response. Neuroplasticity can get me out. I know this. I'm studying. I'm an amazing student. And I had all the pieces. And then the light bulb went off. Meditation missed the whole boat. And it wasn't meditation that missed it. It was my use of meditation based on what society was portraying meditation to be used for. The world around you, and I'm sure a lot of you agree, makes you think you're supposed to calm down all the time. No, not if you're dorsal vagal. You don't want to calm down, it'll kill you. You want to embody. So contentment couldn't even be a possibility. Joy could not even be a possibility, as those are felt senses of the world, until I got a handle on how to dial my body. Neuroplasticity is that secret weapon to get the mind and the body congruent. It's not about right, wrong at all. It's not about what this guru says or that guru says at all. It's about, can you use the tools out there to get congruent in your body in response to your life so that you can take the reins? And so contentment, I didn't know what contentment meant. I couldn't feel my body from here down until I broke through my last seizure, which was 17 years ago. And I broke through it with neurosculpting. I made it up. I backwards engineered meditation. I saw the pieces that were missing. I made up this protocol. It was a Hail Mary. I rolled the dice and I said, if I don't do something, my daughter doesn't have a mother. And I don't know what to do. And the doctor told me to, this was my protocol. Don't squat. That was the protocol for vasovagal syncope. Don't squat and get up too fast. Okay, I'm having seizures in a car. I'm having seizures eating lunch. There was no understanding of this. So I took matters into my own hands, and I said, my decades of meditation isn't serving me. Why? Oh, because I don't know what my nervous system needs. And I got an understanding of that through neuroscience, and then I figured out what it needed. And I put this protocol together, and I prayed, and I religiously did this inside of, I scrapped my TM meditation. I mean, I've studied with the Shaya monks for years. I'm trained in the 4-year degree of the Berkeley Psychic Curriculum. Like, I have all the metaphysical, all the energetic. I couldn't feel my body. So I gave myself a protocol that would allow me to pull from spirit and stay in my body at the same time and get congruent. And it worked. I entrained to a new autonomic response. I was practicing a new response to a seizure halo. And after 7 months of practice, a seizure hit while I was driving, and I thought I was going to die. And the practice script I had been neuroplastically in training to kicked in, and I broke through my first seizure of my life. I've never, ever stopped a seizure till that moment. And I did, and my body shook like that for hours. And when it was done, I was done. Like, the seizures were gone. I felt it in my bones. I felt it in my muscles. I felt it in my being. And I said, I have to marry this. I'm in service to this. It gave me a second chance, or a third chance, because lightning was second chance. And then so I'm on I don't know what, I'm on like 4 or 5 at this point. But that's the first step to feeling content and joy, is the tools that we're going to give you today are for you to get congruent with mind and body. And forget the shoulds. You are your own recipe. As Jody often says, she had to CEO her own health. You are the CEO of your own health and well-being, and it means having the practices and the discernment to get congruent so that you can have a felt sense of joy and peace and love and forgiveness and contentment and empowerment at your age to go take on the world.
Well, I'm going to kind of bounce off of that. I had my moment several years ago. About 3 years ago, I got COVID, and it smashed my life. I went one day from being in remarkably great condition to losing control over just about every faculty in my body. This was in January of 2021. And I went from 145 pounds to about 98 by the time I got home. I was in the hospital for about 3.5 weeks, more or less. And that's a whole story on its own. But I knew when I got out, it's like once I got out of the hospital, the doctors were like, bye-bye. Like, okay, so what do I do now? I was on an oxygen compressor for about 3 months afterwards. Now, I've been a runner, a marathoner, an ultramarathoner for over 4 decades. And all of a sudden, I can hardly catch my breath. When I went into the hospital and they did a scan of my lungs were filled with what the doctor told me afterwards were millions of microclots, with one clot headed for my heart. Had I waited a little bit longer, and that's a story that's in a book that you can always get on Amazon and find out the gory details, we wouldn't be talking. I wouldn't be here with Lisa. And one of the more disturbing things that came out of it, besides the fact that I had lost control over most of my body's capacity to function well, was my brain. My primary asset, number one. I put so much in terms of cultivating my brain's capacity. And all of a sudden, I would walk into a room, and all of you have heard this stereotypically in terms of what happens to long haulers, and I wouldn't know why I came into that room. Mm-hmm. And then I'd walk back to my bedroom, and then kind of recall, and then walk back again one more time to the other room, and not know why I was in the room. So it wasn't just the stereotypical, where did I put my car keys? It was like, never mind brain fog, who I was decimated. My understanding of my character, who I identified myself to be with, all of that was gone. And I knew then that medical approaches to what was going on with me were non-existent. We're talking January of 2021. So I kind of had to lay it all out on spreadsheets, like how do I get my brain back? How do I breathe again? How do I do push-ups? What is it that I got to do in order to rebuild my microbiome? And it became a study that eventually led to being somewhat stronger than when I got sick. My brain has become my number one asset all over again. And how it is that you can engage different practices, like I said before, different protocols, the way that you choose to live your days, the way that you wake up, everything from how you wake up to the environment that your bed's in, to how it is that you go about your practices in the morning and craft your day till the end of the day. I wasn't a happy human being when I left the hospital. If anything, I was trying to figure out, is this the meaning of life? You live 7 decades, and you're locked in a hospital room, right? There weren't even hospital rooms at that time. They had storage rooms that they had reconverted into hospital rooms. TV set was on all day long. You can only watch CNBC, Fox News, CNN. I think I watched every season of Shark Tank, just like just completely glued to this thing. And I knew when I got home that the first thing I needed to repair was all the damage from what had happened to my brain, right? So I'm sure individuals in here have their own stories in that regard in terms of moments where things have gone completely astray, right? Your life was just thwarted, the lives of people that you love. And in large measure, what I've discovered is that there are whole slews of practices that actually are really critical that I want to talk with Lisa about in terms of how do you actually get your brain back. Believe it or not, for me, was beginning to be grateful. I was like, God damn, I'm so fucking grateful I'm alive. And gratitude became the kind of board that I could jump off of and begin to understand how it is that you think, how you begin to manage your thinking so that you can begin to craft the way of being that you want your brain to be living out of, right? The brain waves themselves that we live inside of kind of run on a scale. They run on a scale of what's called gamma, where you're in high excitability, to beta, high beta, right? This is where we're in right now. Most of us are in beta, unless you're kind of nodding off. So beta, we're having a conversation, you're paying attention, you're not in your default mode, you're not like talking to yourself in your head about something else, but you're listening, right? And you want to kind of stay there if you want to be at the peak of your executive capacity. And then if you want to have like a monk brain, you want to kind of float into theta, you want to float into alpha, And then eventually, when you want to go to sleep, you're going to flow into delta, all right? Then you want to quantify your sleep. We'll talk about that. And wake up in the morning, hopefully in a little bit of alpha, kind of moving up to a little bit of beta. But when you're in high beta and you're in gamma all the time, life is a fearful place to be in. And one of the portholes through that, how do you get out of that, was to actually start to practice gratitude meditation and gratitude in many other ways. I am so grateful every single day when I wake up that I'm not 6 feet under, right? Please, Lisa.
So let's talk about gratitude in the brain. Okay. So I want to mechanize a little bit of what Oz said so that you get a graphic picture of what's happening in the brain. When you are in hypervigilant awareness of the world around you, your midbrain can get very dominant. When I say dominant, no part of your brain is off. Okay, let's just get rid of that myth. But when I say dominant, I mean blood oxygen and glucose, fuel, resources are being consumed more prominently by that part of the brain. There's a lot more neural activity. So when you're in a stress state, the hospital or the I can't or the I shouldn't or the world is scary state or the input coming in is really negative and it's making you hypervigilantly concerned or worried, you've got a midbrain that's starting to consume your resources and get neurally dominant, meaning it's firing, which by default, we know, acts as the other side of the seesaw to the part of the brain that can experience gratitude. So we've got the prefrontal cortex right behind the forehead and the midbrain limbic center, which if you put your fingers above your ears and drill them in to touch, you're going to be in the midbrain, right? Those two, consider them two sides of a seesaw. When we are fear-based, worry-based, concern-based, our midbrain is loud, and the prefrontal cortex gets pretty quiet. It doesn't shut off, but it loses resources, it loses its fuel, it loses its capacity to pull you out of that. And the opposite is true. When you quiet the midbrain through gratitude or meditation or sleep, the midbrain quiets, and then blood oxygen and glucose become available to be used by the front of the brain. So the front of the brain gets resilient and neurologically active. And why that's important to you, and why that's important as a context for gratitude, is because the front of the brain, when it's resilient and accessible, gives rise to everything you've ever said you were proud about yourself. It gives rise to your capacity to love, to empathize, to feel gratitude, to create non-tangible goals in outside of space and time in some mystical future and orient your behavior towards them and keep yourself on track. It gives rise to problem solving and innovation and imagination, everything that Andy talked about last night. All of that is a direct result of your capacity to access your prefrontal cortex. It is extremely dependent on that part of your brain to access those things. And when your midbrain is firing up with concern and worry and the inputs from the world around you that say it's dangerous, then your midbrain is running the show, and reaching for those things is very, very difficult. So there's two ways to notice and use gratitude. One is to first quiet your midbrain through stress regulation. And then gratitude starts to bubble up organically because you're doing this to the midbrain, and by default, you're doing this to the prefrontal cortex. So you can regulate your stress to have more access to gratitude. And then you can go in the other way. You can craft a gratitude practice, which will force prefrontal recruitment, which will then organically quiet your stress center. So there is nothing non-neuroscientific about a gratitude practice.
Oh, you can actually, if you go to Google, if you go to National Institute of Health, if you go to ChatGPT, if you look up gratitude now, there's studies that seem to indicate that your life will go better, But not only that, it looks like gratitude actually opens up the possibility, the potential for living longer, right? Who would have thought about that? And there's other kinds of practices that you can embody that when you kind of put them all together, like cars and the train, like kindness, like humility, like gratefulness, right? And you can just keep adding on these different practices. Being a hardcore New Yorker, I was not a nice, kind person.
Me either. Long Island
Cynical.
Sicilian. I had a disadvantage out of the gate. So let's talk about some other practices that you have access to. Sleep. It's a practice. You have to sleep. You need that for consolidation. And we were talking about this earlier, and I want to address this because I see this with you all. You're all ridiculously productive people. That's why you're here. And that's a gift. And it also comes with sometimes the guilt or the shame of when you're not producing. Who are you? And this is about tailoring this to your well-being. So I want to tell you something that may help with that. You cannot learn anything if you don't have consolidation time. There's a learning arc. If you ramp up recruited attention to learn something or to produce something or to create something, that is a finite energy that you use. And when you're done with that, if you don't consolidate, you cannot do it again the next time better. You can only do it the next time the same. So learning does not happen without proper sleep. Prefrontal resilience does not happen without proper sleep. Gratitude does not happen without a prefrontal cortex that has resources, i.e. sleep. So that's the number one practice. The number two practice, well, these are not in any particular order, but number two is meditation, and not random calm down meditation, which can be perfect for you when you need it, but specific neuroplasticity meditation that is designed to exercise the front of your brain, give you access to your best self traits so that you are safe enough to embody and unwind the very scary habituated patterns that have kept you from succeeding up to this point. That stuff does not resolve itself without a resourced nervous system. That's why so many people need therapists. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's the resource, right? But you have that resource built in. As long as you can condition your brain, you can go into your nervous system and unwind limiting self-talk, limiting beliefs, limiting patterns, chronic illness. And this is what birthed the Neuropraxis app, which is an app that has a library of about 70 different neurosculpting meditations to help people move through chronic illness so that those symptoms don't become habituated, so that your diagnosis doesn't follow you for the rest of your life. And so that's the second practice. The third practice is, are you exercising? And you said this yesterday. If you are not exercising and oxygenating, and Dr. David Perlmutter actually says it should be technically enjoyable exercise, which stimulates BDNF, which you mentioned yesterday. So brain-derived neurotrophic factor, you all have it, you're making it right now. Isn't that cool? You're making it right now, and you didn't even know it, but you'll make it more if you oxygenate. And what does that do? You know the airplane cannot find the gate without the person who does this with the glow cones. That is what brain-derived neurotrophic factor does, is it guides the growth of new axons, which are the tails of neurons. It guides those to grow and orient towards a connection to another. It is the mojo of neural connectivity. And that happens when you exercise measurably more if it's enjoyable exercise based on studies. And that could be a walk. It doesn't have to be like, CrossFit. So we've got sleep, we've got neuroplasticity meditation like neurosculpting, we've got exercise, and then we've got food.
Diet, the microbiome, the particular bacteria that invades your bowel, and should be there. I think I mentioned this yesterday. You're made up of trillions of cells, probably about, out of drop a trillion, about 50 trillion cells overall. And a lot of who you are, what your body is composed primarily of bacteria that lives in your colon, that lives in your skin, that lives in your orifices. Some statistics appear to indicate that you're about 70% bacteria, maybe 30% human. Right? And it's inside of that you can use what's going on in your brain and your mind through different practices and protocols, certainly dietary, so that you can actually run what's going on in your body. When you're a mindful human being, you're paying attention to what it is that you're putting into your body, what it is that you're consuming, so that it's building healthy tissue, healthy muscle, healthy ligament, healthy collagen, healthy brain. Lisa and I were talking about this earlier. The brain lives in a pool of fat. And it looks like through evolution, going back hundreds of thousands of years, probably as we moved away from the interior of Africa and we began to move towards coastlines and closer to the ocean, and we started to expose our bodies to seafood itself, the high consumption of EPA and DHA probably had a lot to do with firing the development of the prefrontal cortex. So it looks like fish and fish oil in particular play a big role in the health of your body, developing not only a better body, less inflammation, but a better brain overall. In order to think about all the different things that have to do with having a brain that's recreating itself, that is neuroplastic, you're looking at all the ingredients that Lisa put in, but diet, believe it or not, is not the most important one. It appears to be sleep. Right? Sleep seems to trump, oops, I shouldn't have said that. Sleep.
Shake it off, everybody. Go like that.
Sleep seems to win over everything else. Not good sleep, doesn't matter if you're eating everything and buying everything from Whole Foods or the local farmers. You can work out all you want. And we know that exercise is critical for how long you may live and reducing infirmities in your body. But it looks like not adequate sleep, not deep sleep, not REM sleep, all the different components of sleep itself, it's not going to pay off all that well if you're working out in the ways that many of us do in here. So to that end, being out in nature. And I wanted to pass that one on to you.
Yeah, so what I just want to tag on to sleep. Your REM cycles are cumulative. They don't each do the same thing. They build onto each other. So it's the amount of REM cycles you get that is the consolidation and repair magic. So if you cut your sleep short, even if it was deep, but you didn't get the right amount of stacked REM cycles, you haven't consolidated and repaired. And then just one note about sleep aids, and I'm not a pharmaceutical expert, but if a sleep aid doesn't allow you to have REM cycles, then you are really damaging your brain, because your sleep is not doing what sleep is supposed to do. It's not consolidating anything. It's just turning off. So that's why a lot of people who are on sleep aids that don't allow for REM cycles wake up exhausted and can't figure out why. It's because you need the REM cycles. We also happen to have ultradian cycles, which are day waking versions of REM cycles. I want to talk about those a little bit, because you can actually architect your day to optimize based on ultradian cycles of attention. So there is a bell curve, an arc to your capacity to focus on anything. And it goes in 90-minute cycles, just like during sleep. So there is a 20 to 30-minute ramp up whenever you're wanting to focus on something. There's about a 20 to 30-minute ramp up where you're not fully in recruited focused attention. You're generally like maybe remembering to turn off your phone or getting settled or orienting or organizing so that you could dive in. Then between 30 minutes and 70 minutes or so, you have a window of a harmony of neurotransmitters that are going to give rise to recruited focused attention, which may feel like flow. Where you're in it, you lose sense of time, you're doing what you're doing, and you've got this beautiful harmony of norepinephrine and dopamine and acetylcholine, which are synergizing together, which together do this. They quiet distractions, they focus on the target, and then they stamp that into memory. That's what those three neurotransmitters do when they're in the peak of the attention cycle and learning. And then you're done, because your prefrontal cortex is a diva. It will not serve you all day long. And after about 70 minutes, with a nice 20 to 30 minute warm-up, it's done. And then you've got your come down, where you're not really focusing much anymore, you're not learning. And you must stay in that valley to consolidate. So if this were my day and I was organizing it, I would look at my flow of the day. When do I need to do the most taxing mental work? I want that work to be in between the 20-minute mark and the 75-minute mark of any fresh attention cycle. And then I want to build into my day consolidation time, which means stop being productive, because you are spinning your wheels like driving a car without oil, and you're going to blow a rod. So at the bottom of that 90-minute cycle, you stop, you shake, you do a gratitude practice, you go eat a healthy snack, you listen to 10 minutes of your favorite song, you take off your shoes, you ground outside, you put on neuropraxis, you do a module, and then you are ready. And you will be 10 times more optimized and productive at the end of a day based on your ultradian rhythm cycles than you will if you try to push through the 4 hours of grinding it out. Your brain will be less efficient, and what you've ground out will be full of mistakes and inaccuracies in all the wrong directions. And you're going to have to redo that, which makes you far less efficient. And that's difficult for a type A person to really own, but that's the gift of neuroplasticity, is it doesn't bend its rules. And so if we know the rules, we get to use them. And we get to optimize. And I think if you did that, then that book, The 4-Hour Workweek, actually makes sense. But if you don't do that, then there's no way that book makes sense, because you're like, how am I going to get everything done? Yeah.
So being outdoors, play, pursuing flow states, pursuing flow triggers. Flow is a word that's kind of used a lot these days to try and describe a space that you're in when your prefrontal cortex shuts down, your monkey voice, your monkey brain isn't kind of chattering away nonstop, and you're just in the moment. A lot of studies have been done on flow by different individuals, Stephen Kotler, Jamie Wheel, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He wrote the original thesis on flow, which is a book called Flow. His story is really, really quite incredible. He was a Holocaust survivor, spent time in a concentration camp as a child, came to the United States as an adult, and he became the leading thinker on the pursuit of happiness. And there are many other thinkers, too, that have a great deal to add to authentic happiness. But what Mihaly was interested in was finding out, how do you actually develop peace of mind, how do you develop authentic happiness, and how do you get into flow states? So I think one of the most important things in terms of getting control over your brain, getting control over your mind, is how do you move into flow? If you're one of the world's top skiers, like Tracy Vaughn. Remember Tracy Vaughn? I mean, remarkable skier. And you're at the top, and you're going to go down, Olympic skier, and you're going to go down the hill at about 60 miles an hour. You better be in a flow state. Because if you're halfway down, it occurs to you that, God damn it, I didn't pay that bill. Boom. You're out of flow. You're back into the monkey brain, and you just hit a tree. And it's important to understand that flow states are critical. You probably move in and out of microflow states all day. But in the end, what it looks like, at least from my point of view, that you want to achieve is flow states episodically. And you can achieve that through intense sports. You can achieve that through the practices that Lisa's talking about. You could do it through mindfulness meditation. But you can do it by having a great conversation with somebody. So long as you notice that you're quiet inside. For me, I think one of the more radical things to achieve in the world today is peace of mind. How do you commodify? How do you make peace of mind a commodity? Not greater accumulation necessarily. I make the distinction between blind ambition and ethical ambition. So I think that at core, in terms of what Lisa and I are talking about, so that you have a brain that continues to build itself, the brain that builds itself, and you're talking about neuroplasticity, you're talking about all the different things that you ought to be doing besides having your brain control you. We live in an era where the world itself is making us way too anxious. How do you not be anxious? Like how do you be appropriately anxious? If you could say that, right? Anxiety once played a great role. You've got parts of your brain that are called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala had a role when you were a hunter-gatherer and you were out with your little primate creature and you were kind of picking berries and nuts and looking for something to kill and eat. And you look up and you see off in the distance the grasses are moving. You better get anxious. You don't know what's behind there. Is it being moved by the wind? Is it being moved by some predator? You grab the kid. You're being moved by the amygdala. You have norepinephrine, adrenaline, all the different chemicals going to get you out of harm's way. One of the problems that we find today is that that mechanism doesn't turn off, doesn't shut off. It just keeps going. And you just keep generating all the different chemicals that keep you in high beta and gamma, and you feel anxiety, right? And that produces needless suffering. The term is amygdala hijack. How do you get out of a hijack, right? And how people do this through circular reasoning, like how do I stop this? I think last year, just for benzos alone, 150 million scripts were written for Klonopin, clonazepam, Xanax. How do you get off of that without having to rely on those medications? And I think what Lisa and I are talking about is how do you achieve peace of mind while you're maintaining the stability of your brain as you're kind of incorporating the practices that we're talking about?
I want to talk a little bit about the result of that chronic anxiety or stress. What is that doing to your brain? If you don't take any intervention for regulating your own nervous system, there's a cumulative effect, right? So excessive cortisol. Let me give you the story. The amygdala senses the need for self-protection. It tells the hypothalamus, you better help the body get on board with this because I'm sensing danger. The hypothalamus signals the pituitary and the adrenals, and you produce adrenaline and cortisol, right? So the signal comes from the amygdala and the hippocampus and the hypothalamus, and the body responds. And what happens if you don't intervene and regulate is that the cortisol levels will then start to damage the very mechanism that turned it on. So we see hippocampus damage as the result of chronic cortisol. What does that mean? It means, let's pretend you turn on the overhead fluorescent lights and you have a migraine. And those lights now catapult you into a migraine. And instead of turning off the switch through regulation practices, you take a shoe and you throw it and you break the switch in the on position. That is what cortisol does to the hippocampus, which means chronic unregulated stress is going to result in hippocampal damage, hippocampal shrinkage, which is also going to be the hallmark predisposition to Alzheimer's. And I don't know if anyone has ever held or seen an Alzheimer's brain, and I was in the brain lab fortunate enough to actually see a shriveled hippocampus. It's It's sad because if you look at a healthy brain versus an Alzheimer's brain, you can see it a mile away, and you don't even have to be a doctor to know that brain is diseased because all the gyri, those squiggly parts, have shrunken and dehydrated. It looks like a dehydrated prune. And that is the result of unregulated stress in many cases. So every neurodegenerative disease that we have that also is a comorbidity of and with depression and anxiety is in some way preventable with stress management, in some way, to some degree. And this is all inside of you. This is where neuroplasticity comes in. Neuroplasticity is your capacity to change and intervene with those patterns. Yeah.
So that brings us back to neurosculpting and the tools that I think are available that Lisa has put together, and the ones that I think, and I've been talking about, that actually will allow you to maintain your brain and its function and continue to regenerate itself while you're commodifying the states of mind that you want to embody. I spent time over the last several months in a very deep course of meditation with a gentleman named Joe Dispenza. I'm sure many of you have heard about him. And I never would have thought that anybody could go this deep. I was part of a study through the University of California in San Diego, where the first day that I entered the course, they drew my blood, they took a sample of my DNA, they brain mapped me, looked at my stool, my urine, and then after a week of 48 hours of meditating, they did it all over again. And to see the results and to begin to understand that your brain and its state has so much to do with your health, with your immune system, with your hormone regulation, with your microbiome. It looks like the microbiome itself has to be cultivated. I kind of dropped that off before, but everybody needs to be on a diet that has fermented foods, that has probiotics included into it. Certainly, if you've been exposed to antibiotics at any point, if you weren't breastfed, if you were a C-section baby, all probiotics, the ones that you got in the goodie bag, the seed ones, you can start with that if you're not using them. But when you think about the evolution of human being, when you look at most mammals, they're always being exposed to something fermented. Elephants are going to go out of the way to get rotten fruit off the ground that's somewhat fermented with bacteria. Right? And they keep recolonizing their bowels. And you're going to find this across all mammal species for the most part. For us, given the amount of stress that we're under often, given the conditions of life that we often endure, it can decimate your microbiome. Just the quality of your life can destroy your microbiome. Right? But we know that there's a gut-brain connection, that there are probiotics, and they're extremely common, everything from acidophilus to bifido to bulgaricum. I could just name a whole bunch of them. They're all lactobacillus-based, and there's some that are soil-based, that when you introduce them into your diet, are going to actually have a massive impact on how the brain expresses itself. We can deal with depression, we can deal with anxiety, also by manipulating the bacteria that's found in your bowel. This is really quite fascinating. So it looks like being in nature, kind of monitoring the amount of time that you're exposing yourself to digital equipment, your cell phone, your computer. Try not to get to email zero every time an email pops up, like, I gotta get. Reducing the amount of time that you spend in front of a TV set. Now, these are things that you've already heard, but they're not bromides. It's not like, hey, it's kind of cute to not watch the news. It's like, don't fucking watch the news. Just don't do that. Right? Like just get a hit of it, like a few minutes. Watch the New York Times, online. Okay, that's enough. Right? Maybe listen to a little bit of NPR. Be careful with the news. I was a news addict junkie my whole life. I come from a very political family. News, in New York City, they would teach you how to read the New York Times in high school. Literally, it was like really cool. Like, how do you fold it so you can sit in the train and read it? You know, like, look really smart. That's clever. Right? And as an adult, I would meditate with CNN on in the background.
I would advise against that. I don't think that's a good idea.
A morning Joe. But it got to the point where finally I just understood. I had a client actually tell me this years ago. He said to me, I stopped reading the news and I just feel so much better. And I'm like, yeah, right. There's no connection between that. Don't watch the news. It's becoming something important to not pollute yourself because it starts making you anxious. If you drink coffee already, you may have a problem, except if you have the gene sequence that allows you to be comfortable with it, right? But if you're drinking coffee, you're getting all revved up and anxious from that, and then on top of that, you open up the New York Times, it's like, oh my God.
It always astounded me that we as humans understand our nervous system is supposed to adapt to the world around us, but then we think that what we see, hear, say, taste, and eat has no effect on us. That is the most illogical thing I could imagine. I did want to take a second and explain to you the difference between meditation, mindfulness, and neurosculpting, because they're each for a specific effect, and now you, if you know that, can choose wisely for whatever effect you need to create the state change you're looking for. Meditation, generally speaking, as a big blanket term, is for relaxation and or clearing the mind and or reaching deep states of, let's say, like alpha, delta, theta even. Okay, those are like consolidation states. So that's over here. They have nothing to do with getting you congruent with your body because they do not involve the body. So that's over here. Mindfulness starts bringing it into the sensory experience. So it's bringing a sense of focused attention to one or more of your senses. What are you tasting? How does it feel in your mouth? What is the smell of the air you're breathing? So mindfulness is a more embodied practice, and it's not necessarily for you to clear your mind. Mindfulness is to help you embody and orient you to your sensory experience with congruence. That's mindfulness. And then neurosculpting is designed to get you to relax as a preset to then go deep into your nervous system with as much efficacy, efficiency, and potency as possible to go find where your body is habituating to an old pattern and unwind it and untorque it, and then entrain and remember the edit you made. It's mind active. So we've got no thought. I'm trained in TM, and TM is no thought. Thoughts float away. I'm not my body. I'm more than my body. This is all true, and that's no thought. It's a disembodied form. Sensory form, mindfulness, orientation to the senses, neurosculpting, let's roll up our sleeves and change some patterns. So neurosculpting is extremely mind active, it's playful, and it involves one of the key components of neuroplastic efficiency, which is curiosity, novelty, and wonder. If you want to use your prefrontal cortex to give rise to gratitude and all of the other things, then if you can stimulate it with novelty, curiosity, and wonder, it will work for you. So when you come tomorrow morning to the neurosculpting meditation, we're going to dive in and you are going to have a mind-active Imaginarium experience, much like you saw Andy show that movie last night. It's going to be a wonderland of your own mind. So there's no clearing of the thoughts in neurosculpting. There is direction of the thoughts and a permission and an invitation to have a whole lot more of them. So you learn how to influence the current and not be hit by it. So those are the different flavors of those things, and I'll tell you the different use cases. If you are stressed, agitated, and too hypervigilant, you might want to reach for a meditation practice for calming down. And then to the effect of someone I was talking with earlier, what if I can't go right to sitting still at all? Well, then do a physical shaking practice first, so then maybe you can sit and let stuff go. If you are in a bit of stress or trauma patterning, and you want to approach a meditation practice, start with mindfulness, because you need to understand how to get safely into your senses before you float away. Because for those who are traumatized, floating away is either an inflammation of what they're already doing to cope, they're exiting and disembodying, or it's too damn dangerous to not control my thoughts, so I will not float away because I might just open Pandora's box. So for trauma people, I've had a practice for 17 years. We've got practitioners all over the country, and I never, ever put a traumatized person into a no-thought meditation because they lose it and re-traumatize themselves, in my experience. And if you want to just do the work of change, then you choose neurosculpting, and you can choose each based on what you need. This is about you crafting your wellness plan. So those are a bit of the differences. And then, of course, the energetic world is a whole other thing that's happening all the time through all of this. And so if you've got energetic tools, that's also very helpful as you are learning here this week as well.
Yeah, I would recommend highly Barry Lipton's book, Biology of Belief. I think it's terrific, and it speaks about energy, right? The kind of intangible that we all live in, that moves through us. Being hardcore scientific thinker, and again coming from New York, I would have had a hard time thinking until I had my moment where I could understand that it's all energy, right? And without going into the woo-woo and the mystical, or maybe the mystical for a little bit, that there's something that I would never have thought about before. And I think Barry covers it really well in Biology of Belief. A lot of people have a rough time with him. This is one of the most brilliant cell geneticists ever, who started cloning cells and came to the conclusion at some point there was something behind it that you couldn't explain through science. As you get down to a cell, you get down to a molecule, you get down to an atom, you get down to a quark, and you get down to particles that they can't even name yet. How is it that an atom can exist in two places at once, in two separate parts of the universe? It's like, does science have an answer for that? So the questioning begins to show up in terms of novelty. What it is that Lisa said, it's the novelty that's driving me to find out more about what's this all about. What's this show all about, right? We're all going to die. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. But I don't want to die. I don't want to die.
I don't want you to die either.
I don't want to die reflecting on what it is that I missed. And I think, to the point of novelty, something fascinating came up in the news, which is reading fiction. We were talking about this in the Harvard Business Review, that reading fiction has a massive impact on building the brain. And all I've done for years is read nonfiction, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I got to start reading fiction again. No, this is good for neuroplasticity. Never would have thought of that. I get a good fiction book and I kind of read it halfway through, and it's like now I'm like dying to finish as many as I can before I die.
Let's talk about this for a minute. Not your death, but something else. This came to me this morning when I was talking with the group. It's not about what you do. It's about how you are being when you are doing. And I was thinking about this as I was going to sleep last night, because we're all so highly productive and we all do so much. But if you do all of that in a stressed state, without access to contentment, gratitude, compassion, joy, then when you get to your end of days, you have regret. Nobody cares at the end of their days about the checklist they checked off. They only care about how they felt through their life and how they made other people feel. So whether you do the most monumental things with your life or you do the simplest of things with your life, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It matters how you're being when you're doing. And the thing that causes you to have a sense of being is a nervous system whose job it is to decipher the purpose of your soul and make it come out through your body in a three-dimensional, identifiable way. That's what your nervous system is for. So when I think of that, I think neuroplasticity is the thing that helps me be in congruence with equanimity, with self-direction, with autonomy, with empowerment. These are all the things that are our birthrights and that we're all searching for. It's why we come to these amazing places, because we're searching to be the thing we want to feel, to do those things with a sense of purpose and self and compassion. So when I think of neuroplasticity, I think that is the key. Those are the codes to the nervous system. I want to tell you briefly about some of the things neuroplasticity has already gotten you to do, so you realize how vital it is to your well-being. If you walk, if you talk, if your heart continues to beat all on its own, that's because of neuroplasticity. That's because you have learned a pattern and habituated to it or made it an automatic pattern. And we have central pattern generators that are in the autonomic nervous system that are very base level doing that. And then we have larger patterns. Every physical disease, every emotional malady, every mental belief, every cultural belief, every spiritual belief you have in some way has created a pattern inside of you. If you can retrieve that thing or feel it or replicate it, it's because it's a pattern. Therefore, if you learn how to manipulate patterns in your nervous system, then you can manipulate any of those levels of being. Physical manipulation, emotional manipulation, mental and spiritual. And I think it would be helpful just to tell you a few of the use cases. Everything from having suicidal, anxious people in my practice who are weaning themselves off medication and finding a sense of self because their habituated patterns of how they had to respond to the world have changed because of the neuroplasticity work they've done. I work with spinal cord injury, and we have gotten quadriplegics to move fingers after 13 years of paralysis. All this is on YouTube. You can actually see her do this for the first time in 13 years after one meditation where we rewired how her motor cortex speaks to her thalamus that speaks to her thumb. That's not to say all things can 100% be eradicated, but that is to say no matter what the insult or injury is to your mental, emotional, physical, spiritual body, at least a piece of it is habituated. And why wouldn't you go in and tinker with any part of that process that you have influence over to make your life better? And neuroplasticity doesn't discern which body you're working on. It'll work to habituate and unhabituate anywhere you focus it. I have a left hemisphere stroke client. He was at Craig Hospital for 8 months. He was the director of a hospital in New Mexico, spoke 5 languages, was in transcendental meditation, and had a stroke. Left hemisphere, gone. Lost all ability to communicate and all movement on the right side. After 8 months of speech rehabilitation at Craig, he had 2 words, yes and no. And I came in and I worked with him, and we recorded the session, and in one 20-minute neurosculpting meditation, he came out and he said the word happy. Anything can be rewired. Anything. To what degree, that's up to you. That's up to your time, focus, and repetition, because those are the laws of neuroplasticity. So I want to do a really quick review and then tell you how to get more. Sleep. Oxygenate through exercise. Choose the right meditation practice for you. Neurosculpting will get you embodied to rewire. Mindfulness will get you oriented to senses. Meditation will get you no thought relaxation. Look at what you're eating. Make sure you're getting carbs, fats, and proteins, because your brain needs all 3 of those. Unmitigated stress will damage the hippocampus and predispose you to all sorts of neurodegenerative diseases. Gratitude practice will recruit prefrontal cortex activity. Novelty will recruit prefrontal cortex activity. What did I miss?
Emotional intelligence, like get over your anger, get over your antagonism. It's killing you. If you're prone to angry outbursts, why don't you examine what's going on with you? If you're around people that are prone to angry outbursts, if you've got regrets, get over them. Don't catastrophize over the future. Find the means by which you can actually be here more, right? In the moment. And it's work. It's a lot of hard work. Emotional intelligence is something that needs to be cultivated every single day. The tendency to go off and think about why did I sell that property and what happened there in that relationship and blah, 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 and I blew that. It's like, what's the point? Why drive yourself crazy over things that you can't do anything about anyway? You're here. It's all in the past, and that's gone. And you can't do anything about the future. You can plan, you can be mindful, but you can control this moment. That's about it. That's all we got. We got this moment. So emotional development. And finding out that one of the ways to get to happiness is not be so angry. Those are hardwired into the primate body that you embody. People are not good by nature. You learn to be good. Not a goody-goody, but you learn to be good. Right? Whenever I've heard people say, hey, people are really good, deep down. I'm like, no, they're not. Don't be fooled. People are duplicitous. Trust needs to be earned. Be careful who you trust, including yourself. Be careful of the voice in your head.
I want to say that if you have any questions, you can grab me whenever. I love talking about this. I'll talk about it all day. I'm very transparent. Candidly share whatever it is you want to know, or just laugh and tell jokes by the fire is fine too, because humor is great for the prefrontal cortex. And I really hope that you join me at Summit at Sea, so we can do this on a boat. That will be novel. We're going to do this on a boat. So I'm very excited about that. And so excited to just be up here talking with you.
That's terrific.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.